Before I begin my story, sad, unfortunate coincidence. I've been planning this story for a while now. It just so happens I mentioned Patty Duke in it, and feels doesn't really change anything. But it's worth mentioning her name. And when I do mention her name, I just want to remember what a remarkable actress and humanitarian she was. She's really an idol of mine. Okay, so if somebody were to come up to me and say, "Name a miracle worker," well, I, being the movie connoisseur who I am, as some of you might figure out, would be most likely to say Anne Sullivan. Did everyone here know who Anne Sullivan was? Well, for those who don't, she was Helen Keller's teacher, her communicator. She helped her find her voice. If you haven't seen The Miracle Worker, first of all, I recommend it. It's a great movie, great director, Arthur Penn, and I imagine Anne Sullivan is looking a lot like Anne Bancroft and Helen Keller, Patty Duke, because they really did disappear into their roles. They were quite amazing. And all hope had been given up on Helen Keller by her family and other teachers who had tried to reach her. And she was a very rough, very belligerent individual and very isolated. But that didn't stop Annie Sullivan. And of course, she was successful, and ultimately, as we all know, Helen Keller found her voice, her way to express it. So no matter how you define the term miracle worker, secular or religious, you can't deny what Anne Sullivan does was phenomenal. And the movie came out in '62. I wasn't born yet. I was born in '64. Yeah, I'll be 52 this year. So, and I saw the movie when I was in my late 20s. I wish I had seen it sooner. I don't know why I didn't. But even then, even to this day, the child fascinated by the movies, one aspect remains, is that when a movie really touches me strongly, I fantasize, what if life were like the movies? What if I could be like the movies? I don't mean what if I can ride the movies like the Universal Studios tour. That never interested me. That's gadgetry as far as I'm concerned. I mean the heart and soul of the movie. I mean to really live it. As a child, my first fascination was MGM musicals. I did want life to be an MGM musical. I wish they could break into song when I was a kid. But in this case, I always fantasized, once I saw the movie, having a real-life miracle worker situation. When I finished college when I was 30, and I'm talking BA, I took my time. What was the hurry? And my degree was in gerontology, so meaning, of course, that I had goals of working with seniors and getting this piece of paper, thinking, like so many recent college graduates do, that they're going to take the world by storm, and then getting that rude awakening soon thereafter. The first job I was offered, I decided to go ahead and take it. It wasn't the ideal one. It wasn't exactly what I was looking for, mainly because it was working in an adult group home, mentally challenged adults. And it was residential health care, which is what I was looking to get into. And also, I was thinking how I could apply some techniques about Alzheimer's programming activities for Alzheimer's would apply in this situation as well. So I was glad to take the job. And my experience with mentally challenged people had been limited, but in my mind, it was all centered around a conversation I had years earlier involving a friend of the family's and who had a granddaughter who was mentally challenged, and how her daughter was making a decision. I gave my 2 cents. I won't get into it, but I described it as if what the granddaughter felt meant absolutely nothing, as if she couldn't feel, because I'm trying to say I was young and I was stupid, but I just figured, well, she's got no brainwaves, so therefore she's got nothing. There's nothing there. What does she know? And yeah. And I just talked about that to my friend, and the friend of the family didn't say anything about it. I guess she was used to that. But I'm having the conversation right after that about it with someone else. She's like, "Do you ever wonder what the granddaughter would think?" And I said, "But she doesn't. But what? She's not there." And she goes, "Maybe she is." And I'm, "Oh my gosh, maybe she's right." Whoops. And so when I got this job, I welcomed the opportunity to prove that I was wrong in that conversation I had. And so I meet this group. My first position there was an overnight position. I was always curious about what it was like to work the overnight. So I took an overnight job at first. I did come in the daytime to meet all the residents. The resident that stood out for me was the most cognitive, most lucid gentleman. He was like someone who it would be easy to have a conversation with. Like he would be, I figured on the day at the job, he would be sort of like an oasis. When I wouldn't be able to communicate with the others, I can go to him and have the comfort of a normal conversation. And see, I still had a little ways to go. And but then, oddly enough, the resident who stood out the least was a woman named Sandra. Okay, now Sandra, I was 31 at the time, she was 45. And but I was told she was mentally less than half a year old. She was confined to a wheelchair, and no talking at all, just making some moaning sounds occasionally. And and she seemed like she was shuffled aside there, like she wasn't rough to work with, and she didn't do much. She didn't do much in terms of helping with personal care, but she also didn't resist, so it was really easy. Like the most she did, when it was time to undress her at night, she didn't know to raise her hands to lift up her shirt, and she also, some of the time, would open her mouth to eat. She had some eating problems, though, too, that were apparent. But I was, when I was working the overnight, one night I had to check her. I had to pull down her covers, and she grabs them and pulls it back. And then that was my spark, and I was like, there is somebody there. Because that was not merely a reflex. That was a real conscious move on her part. And so I'm again trying to convince myself that to prove myself wrong about thinking that limited brainwaves means limited everything, limited heart and soul. And so I'm meeting the challenge. I decide to make an effort to get closer to her. And first thing I did in doing so, her name was Sandra, as I said, and everyone always addressed her as Sandra. She had this painter's hat that a family member had gotten her. She looked so adorable in it. I don't know what it was, but the thing is, it said Sandy across the top in the front. And I asked the staff, did anyone ever address her as Sandy? And it was always, no, it's Sandra all the time. And so I just thought I'd try it, because I figured since a family member got that, maybe that's something that would relate to her childhood. As soon as I started calling her Sandy, she started looking up at me. And then I had something there, and then now, one of my goals in the field of working with senior programming, that also would apply here, is working with music. As I said earlier in my description, I like a wide variety of music, and I like to find what reaches people. Seen in the movie Awakenings really changed me on that. Anyways, so her roommate has this cassette tape, yes, this is still the age of the cassette tape, of Billboard hits of 1960, and I look on it, and there's Angel on My Shoulder by Shelby Flint. Couldn't be more perfect. To those who don't know the song, it's a very, very sophisticated song, but it's also very heartfelt, a very beautiful song. And every time I hear it, it brings out the child in me. I don't know about the rest of you, but it's just a magnificent song, and and yes, it worked for her. I played it for her, and she started looking up. And I knew that song had a magic spell, and it worked on her. Then I was soon thereafter working more in the daytime. I adjusted my schedule to work days. I noticed one day this house is built, it's on a hill, it has a single level sidewalk that goes in the square around it. And I'm like, that's made that way for a reason. And so after dinner, one night I started one time, I just took her out and went on a leisurely pace and walked her around the house real slowly. And again, what I said about applying the reasoning about Alzheimer's programming is sometimes the real challenge is to work off the really simplistic. I want to be creative by nature, but sometimes it's best to be simplistic and give something real familiar now. And anyways, the walk, I walked at a leisurely pace, making small talk along the way. And when we got to this corner on the hill where we had a great view, I pointed out some sights, kneeled down beside her, and boy, were we bonding there. And I could tell she valued the time and the one-on-one attention and being in motion after the meal, even though, again, she didn't talk, she just looked at me, and we were starting to communicate. I don't want to say this is telepathy, but it was by intuition, though. She knew what I was trying to tell her, and I knew what she was saying. And there were some words that she would respond to in a certain way, so I think she did understand them. And I also got to be careful in this country, in my field, working in residential healthcare, how much physical contact you come in with residents. So I cleared that, said it was okay to just slightly stroke her on the back with my hand, rub her back up and down. And I would do this real slowly. And then as I would do this, she would start rocking. She was like kind of like a forward rock, and her head would roll back. And it felt like somebody was trying to come out and connect. And from there on, we started getting more eye contact every time I'd see her. It used to be about half the time. And as I would look her in the eyes, I would see a smile start to form. And it was starting to grow. And pardon the cliche, a smile that would launch 1,000 ships. And then one day, one of the greatest moments in any work experience was we were during lunch or during dinner, during a meal. Okay, we were somebody told a joke, and I started laughing hysterically. And she looks me in the eyes, and she starts laughing too. And she just goes, you know. And these two staff members are standing right there beside me, and they were like, "Oh my!" They couldn't believe that. They just like their jaws dropped to the ground, their eyes bulged open. That's what it felt like, anyways. And one of them had just started, but the other one had been there for about 3 years. And the one that had been there for a while, she said, "I'd never seen anything like that in Sandra." And this provided a situation that followed this that brings me to something that my friend Marianne here says, who I've become a lot closer to Marianne since I was working with Sandra. And Marianne, too, has a daughter who is mentally challenged, although not as severely. And in conversation about her daughter and Sandy, she once told me, in some way, people like her are like supernatural beings. And I something proved this with the laughing situation, because after that happened, I tried to repeat it. I tried to look her in the eye and start laughing, but I was faking it. I was pretending laughing. And with my friends, if I'm having a conversation, if I pretend laugh, they don't know. But she did. And I just figured, oh, okay, that must have been a fluke the time she laughed with me. Until somebody told a joke, and I seriously laughed, and then again she laughed with me. She knew it was real. That was an amazing intuition that blew me away. Again, like she said, supernatural being. Yeah. At this point, wherever I'd go with my friends, I'd talk their ear off. Sandra this, Sandra that. I didn't care if it was boring, and I just felt so good to talk about her. Still does, to tell you the truth. One of them suggested to me, "Do you think she might be filling a void in your life where you're missing romantic interest?" And I don't think so. About a year and a half before that, I had a verbally abusive boyfriend that I had broken away from, and I was kind of still emotionally scarred, not looking for anything romantic at the time. But as far as filling a void in my life, I think they were right. Anyone who knows me knows I've never had any desire to be a father. I just don't think that was meant to be. In fact, I actually get offended when people tell me they think I'd make a good father. Don't ever tell me that. And but that said, that might have left a void in my life, like a gap to fill, like a desire to be nurturing. And that was taking over then. And it was sort of a parental relationship, even though she was 14 years older than I am, because something I didn't like when my parents do, and I hear about parents doing this, that I found myself doing with her, was just imagining the perfect life for her. And even though at this point, I would not call her situation anything negative or derogatory, I did wonder, what if Sandra didn't have this condition? I pictured a college professor. I pictured her painting portraits in her living room and listening to Laura Nero. In other words, perfect friend to me, you know. But once I did that, because I think my relationship with her kind of put her in that mode, that might have been how she would have been, and I treated her as such, and she was my peer. And when I said earlier about the miracle worker, how I was, and now I was, by the way, starting to see that a miracle worker situation was occurring here, that in addition to seeing movies and fantasizing life being like them, seeing as many as I do, I once had a roommate who said this to me, and I couldn't argue with him. He says, "You plan your life out like as if it were a movie, as if an audience was watching." And I'm okay. I couldn't deny that. You know, I plot things out how it looks artistically and formatted it. There was one night I was having a conversation with her. The funniest thing is, I actually pictured this very skeptic audience, just looking at, being very judgmental. And I also wonder, was it unconsciously, was that verbally abusive ex-boyfriend? Because he would, anything I was doing career-wise, he would knock, verbally, that is. But like, I used to think he was just a terrible person. Now I feel sorry for him. I think he was, because I was moving forward in life and he wasn't. But anyways, whether it was him or this audience, I felt like I should, that at another time in my life I might have pandered to them, but I didn't. I'm having this conversation with Sandy and I just look her in the eye and say, you know, you're one of the most fascinating people I've ever met in my life. What I heard this audience saying was, he doesn't really mean that. He's just applying it to the situation and to her condition. He means people like, and I didn't care. I just, that's all I could hear, and I just looked the other way. It didn't bother me. And no, to this day, I mean it, of any person in any mental condition. It didn't matter. She was one of the most amazing people I've ever met and had an amazing heart and soul. People look at them and say, poor, well, in her case, poor Sandra. And maybe Sandra has the greatest sense of peace and tranquility or nirvana, whatever you prefer. Maybe she was more content in her life. Yeah, I'm going to get to that. Than any of us could ever hope to be. She might have had the most ideal life, for all we know. So maybe it's poor us. And so I'm describing. It sounds like I'm probably describing the most ideal situation, but other things in that job were not going as well as my living situation. I was ready to relocate and stuff, so I did start sending resumes out, and that's when I got the job here in Austin, which I have to this day. When it came time to say goodbye to her, it was a little rough, but I was very confident because all of the staff had seen all the progress I'd made with her, and they started doing the same, like the walk around the house. They worked that into her regular daily routine, and they would do things like doing dishes or simple household tasks. They'd park her wheelchair beside him and make small talk with her. And that's just what she needed all along. And I know she had it, and I would go back to visit that town. My best friend still lived there, and so I'd go back to see him and always stop and see her several times over the years. And each time I did, it was just like we'd been together yesterday. But then it was in 2011, one of the staff members from the home emailed me to let me know that she had passed. She was 60 at the time. I was not too... I was devastated. I was not too surprised. She had a lot of health problems, and I said earlier she often didn't eat. And but to deal with it, even though I'm not a religious person, drawing from my Jewish background, one of the things I do appreciate, I'm down with, is the 8 days of mourning, and I kind of really gave her that in my own manner, and then moved on in life, and then right away started to just look back with a smile and very positive. And I am really grateful because I feel I did, in fact, have my miracle worker situation. And in case you didn't know what I mean by that, in my version of the miracle worker, Helen Keller was me. I was the one blinded by my ignorant, shallow view of people, like my beliefs. Sandy was the miracle worker. She showed me how to communicate with people like her. She showed me the value of the heart and soul of someone, that limited brainwaves that has nothing to do with heart and soul, and that she's probably, as I said, very fortunate to be such a cheerful person and to be so young at heart. Sandy was my Ann Sullivan.